Well, hello there, and happy Monday to you all. This is David Roach from Quantum Strategy, and this is the micro podcast about macro on a Monday. Hopefully more relevant for longer periods of time than the title would imply. It's going to be short this week because I think there's one thing to cope with, and that is obviously President Trump won an astounding Democratic victory. We are now into the business of predicting what that means for markets. And here are my thoughts. Over the weekend, President Trump rejected Mike Pompeo and Nikki Haley as candidates for high office in his administration. Now, both Pompeo and Haley are what could be broadly defined as neoconservatives. So they believe in a strong interventionist foreign policy by the United States, backed up by a strong defense force. This was rejected. Now, importantly, that tells me a number of things. First and foremost, that big profile figures will not be given big liberty of action or big posts in the administration. Power in the administration will be exercised from the center, from the White House, from the Oval Office, from Trump. The people who are going to be put into positions of high office will be lesser individuals than Pompeo and Haley, whom you may like or dislike, but they certainly knew a lot about the jobs they could have fulfilled as Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense. So we will get lesser experienced, lesser known, less weighty figures in those offices, allowing Trump to exercise power directly. The second point is, what will that power dictate? And the answer, I think, is becoming much more likely now that Trump will betray Ukraine, dump it, and assuage the fight there for a few months. But basically, what he will do is pacify Putin. I think that on the other hand, Trump will start a trade war, principally with China, 60% tariffs. I think he means what he says. But also with Japan, Korea, and the European Union, which will be targeted with lesser tariffs, but nevertheless substantial. The reason those measures will become a trade war is because they are dynamic in effect, which actually means that other countries will retaliate. And don't forget that China has plenty to retaliate with. Its trade figures with the United States are very large. They are an integral part of the US consumer picture. And the tariffs that are imposed will actually result in higher domestic prices. That higher inflation will cause the Fed to switch policy from easing to tightening when they appear, while the fiscal deficit will be increased because the tariffs will eventually be paid for by the consumer, but not by the producer of the goods, which means the federal authorities don't get the money, the budget deficit grows, and that is another reason why the Fed will have to tighten policy. You can't loosen monetary policy at the same time as you're loosening fiscal policy in an economy with only 4% unemployment. That is my picture of what will happen. Now, the sort of people who lie behind the bigger figures, like Pompeo and Haley, are people like Marco Rubio, and Lighthizer, who was Trump's negotiator on trade tariffs in the last Trump administration. Now, Marco Rubio is a decent, honorable man who has voted for many things with which I would agree, like the normalization of the status of illegal immigrants in the United States. But now Rubio has, of course, switched to mouthing what the president trumpets. You know, he's all on board for sending illegal immigrants to deport them. And he's all on board for stopping the war in Ukraine because, as he says, who would want a war to continue? But none of this reveals any independent or analytical thought. With all due respect, his record, and he has a long record of service to the United States in various capacities, is one of a talented gopher who puts together bills and people in a way which gets the bills passed, but not somebody who has a stunning or far-reaching view of the world. Though in the last administration, not this administration, but the one before, he was a good ambassador for the United States' interests in Latin America, and I dare say he will focus his attentions there. Lighthizer is not an economist. He's a lawyer. And his big intellectual conviction is that tariffs work. He does this through a flaw, which is to say, globalization had many faults. And indeed, that is perfectly right. Inequality was one of them. The loss of manufacturing industry in developed countries was another. And all those things are fine if labor markets can be traded across boundaries too, but they can't. So the deglobalization model really didn't work in that respect very well. Where Lighthizer goes wrong is that he says that actually tariffs work. Well, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. Tariffs ultimately end up as being a tax on the consumer of the country consuming the products produced in the country you want to punish. They add to inflation, they lower innovative investment, and they result in a far worse allocation of resources than happened even under globalization. Lighthizer's argument is that in the first Trump administration, it was predicted that putting on tariffs as Trump did would result in the bad results that I've just described, higher inflation and a weaker economy, and they didn't. Now, why was that so? It is not because tariffs work. It is because the US dollar appreciated by 13% against the renminbi. So the tariffs were diluted by the appreciation of the dollar. Hence, they did not cause inflation. Let me tell you straight out that that equation today, that assumption that that will happen again, which is the variable that explains why tariffs did not have negative economic effects, that will not happen again, because the Chinese are not going to let the renminbi slide 13%. They will take countermeasures instead. The Chinese do not need to let the renminbi slide 13% against the US dollar, because today far more of their exports go to the global south and the BRICS. They have diversified. And therefore, they do not need to offset the effect of US tariffs in the same way as when tariffs were imposed in the first Trump administration. However, if Mr. Lighthizer is made Secretary of the Treasury, you can expect that he will pursue his ideological and legally based convictions about how to run an economy. And it will take a substantial period of time for markets and economies to prove that he is wrong. I wish you a very good week. I hope this was useful to you in considering what is absolutely key, which the Trump administration, having won legally and democratically a resounding victory, we must now watch not his lips, but those appointed to office for any sign that what he will do will be anything but damaging to the global economy and therefore to markets. Thanks a lot for watching.